She's a goofy person. I think a lot of people don't really know her outside of basketball. Outside of basketball, she's funny. Like, she has so much personality. I think that's what people need to know about her. Like, her personality goes a long way, and she's a great person. And I think that goes, like, she helps me through every little thing. Like, I could ask a question.
There's a story in sports right now that almost did not happen. Not because of injuries, not because of contracts, not because of any of the usual reasons a career gets derailed. It almost did not happen because of what strangers on the internet decided to do to a 20-year-old girl who was just trying to play basketball. And the reason it did happen, the reason this story exists at all, is because that same girl made the most difficult decision a person can make. She decided not to let the worst chapter of her life become the final one. Before we get into everything, if you're new here and you want stories like this delivered straight to you the moment they drop, hit that subscribe button right now and smash that notification bell. This is the kind of content you do not want to miss. What you are about to hear covers a journey that goes from a single viral moment in a college basketball arena to one of the darkest personal crises a young athlete has faced in recent memory, all the way to one of the most poetic and genuinely unexpected plot twists in women's basketball history. The person at the center of it is Raven Johnson, and the person who is somehow both the reason her story almost ended and the reason it is now more promising than ever is Caitlin Clark. Let's start at the very beginning, because context matters here more than it does in almost any other story you will hear this year. The year is 2023. The stage is the NCAA Women's Basketball Final Four. Iowa versus South Carolina. Caitlin Clark is already operating at a level that very few college basketball players ever reach in their careers. She is the leading scorer in the tournament. She is the name that every commentator keeps going back to. She is the reason casual fans who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives are suddenly tuning in to see what all the fuss is about. South Carolina, on the other side, is no slouch. They're the defending national champions. They're coached by Dawn Staley, who is widely considered one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport. And on their roster is a player named Raven Johnson, a 5'8" point guard from Atlanta, Georgia, who had already proven herself to be one of the best defenders in college basketball. At some point during that game, in a moment that lasted maybe 5 seconds on camera, Caitlin Clark made a tactical decision. Johnson was positioned at the three-point line. Clark, reading the floor and running her offense, made a read. She knew the numbers. Raven Johnson, at that point in her career, was shooting just over 24% from behind the arc. Clark essentially waved her off. She gestured to indicate that Johnson was not a threat from that range and chose not to contest her out there. From a pure basketball standpoint, it was a logical call. You guard your threats. You dare the players who are not threats to beat you from areas where they have not been efficient. Coaches make these decisions constantly. Players make these reads dozens of times in a single game. It was not personal. It was not malicious. It was basketball. But the internet does not care about basketball logic.
Bro, the Fever really selected Raven Johnson as the number 10 pick to come play with Clark. Do y'all remember this? Clark waving her off in college, and then she recently was talking in an interview about it again, about how she got waved off, and now they gonna be playing together.
The clip circulated. Then it spread. Then it exploded. And before anyone had taken a breath to think about what actually happened in that play, the moment had been stripped of all context, given a completely different meaning by thousands of people who had no idea what a defensive scheme looks like, and turned into a narrative about disrespect that had absolutely nothing to do with what was actually happening on the court. And Raven Johnson, who had done absolutely nothing wrong, who had not embarrassed herself, who had made a smart decision by not forcing a low percentage shot in a high leverage game, was at the center of all of it. What followed that moment is something Johnson herself has spoken about with a level of honesty that most athletes never allow themselves in public.
Now, because of that situation, like, I got bashed, I got bullied, I got called all these things that I wasn't, aka like a monkey or this, I don't know, like, it was just things like that. And I just think I wanted to quit basketball at that time. And I wanted to just go in this little bubble of isolation and just be by myself. And I think, I leaned on God. I had some wonderful teammates, wonderful people in my life, like I said, and they helped me find that light, and it put so much fuel to the fire to me to go back the next year, and we went undefeated and met that team again, and we beat them. So I think it was awesome.
She was 20 years old. She was a college basketball player who had worked her entire life to get to that stage. And suddenly, overnight, she became the subject of a pile-on that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with cruelty. The comments flooded in. The mockery came from every direction. And the language that was used, the kind of language that should not need to be described in detail, but that anyone who has spent time on social media in recent years can picture exactly, was vicious in a way that went far beyond sports criticism. Johnson has spoken openly about being called names that had nothing to do with her performance. Racial slurs, dehumanizing language, things that no human being should have to absorb, let alone a 20-year-old student athlete who had just played in the Final Four. She has talked about retreating inward, about building a wall between herself and the outside world, about going into what she described as a bubble of isolation just to escape the noise. And in her most candid moments, she has admitted something that takes real courage to say out loud. She thought about quitting, not taking a break, not sitting out a season, actually leaving basketball, walking away from the game she had given everything to since she was a child. Because the cruelty of complete strangers had become so overwhelming that continuing felt impossible. That is not a dramatic exaggeration. That is not a story being inflated for engagement. That is what a young woman went through because a clip circulated online and people decided to be awful. It is important to understand that before moving forward, because everything that comes next only means something when you understand how low that low actually was. Johnson leaned on her faith. She leaned on her teammates at South Carolina. She leaned on Coach Dawn Staley, who is not just an elite basketball coach, but a person who has consistently been described by her players as a genuine human being who cares about who you are beyond the sport. Those support systems held her together during a period that could have genuinely ended her career before it had a chance to become what it is today. Fast forward to April 14th, 2026. The WNBA draft. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert at the podium. And with the 10th overall pick, the Indiana Fever select Raven Johnson from the University of South Carolina.
Selects Raven Johnson, South Carolina. Raven Johnson, South Carolina.
The reaction online was immediate. Because here's the thing that made this pick feel like something out of a script that nobody would have been brave enough to pitch. The Indiana Fever is Caitlin Clark's team. The franchise that Clark has been building toward a championship. The locker room that bears her presence every single day of the season. And now Raven Johnson, the player who had once been waved off on the biggest stage in college basketball, was not only going to the WNBA, she was going there to wear the same jersey as the woman who had been at the center of that moment. Same team, same practice court, same huddle, same game plan. If someone had written this as a movie, the studio notes would have said to dial it back a little because it felt too convenient. But from a pure basketball standpoint, this was not a sentimental pick. The Fever selected Johnson because she was legitimately one of the most WNBA-ready players in the entire 2026 draft class.
Fever beat New York 109-91. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is people putting respect on Raven Johnson's name. First game, WNBA debut, 6 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds, 1 steal, 2 blocks, no turnovers, you guys. None. I've been talking about Raven Johnson being underrated for far too long. Cut to the clip.
Those of us that have been following the Gamecocks for longer than a couple of years know Raven Johnson is literally her. It is unfortunate that sometimes she does not get the respect that she deserves.
I don't know what you guys thought was about to happen, but this is Raven Johnson, 18 minutes off the bench. First preseason WNBA game. She just got done playing college basketball, you guys. It's only April.
Coming out of her senior season at South Carolina, she averaged 9.9 points per game, 5.1 assists, 4.0 rebounds, and 1.5 steals in under 29 minutes of play. She was named the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. She earned All-American recognition from the Associated Press. She is a 2-time national champion. She had been to the Final Four in 4 of her 5 seasons with the Gamecocks. This was not charity. This was the Fever recognizing that they had an opportunity to add one of the best defensive guards available at a position where they needed depth, and they took it. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive content, drop a comment below with your thoughts on this story. I read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a great time to join the family. Now let us get to the part of this story that everyone wanted to know about the moment the draft pick was announced. The obvious question, the one that had already been asked 100 times before training camp even started. How does it actually feel for Raven Johnson to walk into the same building every day as Caitlin Clark? Not in the press conference version of the answer. In the real version, Johnson addressed it directly. She did not dodge it. She did not give a corporate non-answer about moving forward and focusing on the future. She said she put the past in the past. She said that the moment she put an Indiana Fever jersey on, everything from college, the rivalry, the moment, the online chaos that followed, stopped being the story.
Just competitive spirit. Like, you both want to win a championship, have played a lot of big games, played against each other, trying to win big games. So, like, what is it like, and how quickly did you kind of like marry those two ideas of like, all right, we're teammates now, it's time to go try to win here?
Yeah, I put the past in the past. Honestly, when I put the Indiana Fever jersey on, I said let's try to win the championship together. And I think, you know, with her, that's all she talks about is winning, pro habits, and like the little margin for room are ever very small when it comes to like the finals games. She talks a lot about that. So I just be telling her, like, I want to do whatever it takes to win. Like, I want to win the championship, and that's really the big goal for me and my teammates.
The only story from that point forward was whether they could win a championship together. And Clark, according to Johnson, was saying the exact same thing from day one of training camp. But what Johnson shared beyond that initial answer is what made people actually stop and pay attention. Because she was not just describing a polite professional relationship between two former rivals who have agreed to coexist. She was describing something genuinely warm, something that she had clearly not expected to find, and that had apparently surprised even her. Johnson revealed that Caitlin Clark had been there for her through every difficult adjustment that comes with making the jump from college basketball to the professional level. The pace difference, the tactical complexity, the physical step up, the mental demands of being a rookie in a league that does not slow down for anyone. Johnson said she asked Clark what she estimated was approximately 1,000 questions during a single day of training camp, and Clark answered every single one of them. That detail matters more than it might seem on the surface. Caitlin Clark is the franchise player of the Indiana Fever. She is the face of the team. She is the most commercially significant player in the WNBA right now. Her name is on the jerseys flying off the shelves. Her sneakers are being worn by players across every level of the sport, and her games draw viewership numbers that the league had never seen before she arrived. She has every reason in the world to be protective of her time and energy during the season. Instead, she is sitting alongside a rookie who once stood across from her in a Final Four, answering question after question after question, walking her through the details of professional basketball with patience and genuine investment. That is not what a person does because they are obligated to. That is what a person does because they actually want to see the people around them succeed. And then Johnson went further, because beyond the basketball mentorship, she talked about who Caitlin Clark is as a human being, away from the highlights, away from the endorsements, away from the version of her that gets packaged and presented to the public. Johnson described Clark as loving. She called her goofy. She said that Clark is funny in a way that completely catches people off guard when they have only ever seen her compete. She described Clark as having so much personality, the kind that fills up a room and has nothing at all to do with basketball, and said that most of the world genuinely does not know that version of her. The version that is cracking jokes during film sessions. The version that is doing ridiculous things in team photos just to get a laugh out of the group. The version that has a sense of humor so sharp and so disarming that Johnson described specific moments where Clark made her laugh and then left her wondering where that had even come from. That is not the Caitlin Clark that exists in the public imagination for most fans. The public version of Clark is intensity, competitiveness, clutch shooting, and trash talk on the court. The version that Raven Johnson described is something softer, something more human, something that only the people inside the building actually get to see. The Indiana Fever social media gave the rest of the world a glimpse of exactly that dynamic during training camp. A series of photographs surfaced showing Clark and Johnson in what could only be described as pure, unscripted fun. One image showed Clark appearing to bolt away from Johnson in a full-on sprint during what was clearly a playful moment. Another showed Johnson wrapping Clark in a hug while Clark pulled the most exaggerated, ridiculous expression she could manage for the camera. This was not a brand activation. This was not a stage shoot for a sponsor. This was two people who found each other on the other side of something complicated and decided to build something real from it. You cannot manufacture that kind of chemistry. You can stage photos. You can write press releases. You can coach two players to say the right things in front of cameras. But you cannot fake the kind of warmth that was visible in those images between Johnson and Clark. Either it is there or it is not. And every piece of evidence, from the quotes to the photos to the on-court moments, points in the same direction. It is absolutely there. Johnson spoke about the dynamic between her and Clark with the kind of ease and comfort that you only hear when someone is describing a relationship they have genuinely settled into and started to enjoy. She talked about Clark having that sense of humor that makes her laugh. She talked about how they match in the kind of energy they bring to the lighter moments of the day. She described the experience of being in Indiana as something she loves. Not in the way that players say they love their new city because they're contractually and socially expected to, but in the specific, personal way of someone who has found her people and knows it. And here is something that does not get talked about enough in the broader conversation around this team. Aaliyah Boston is also on the Fever's roster. Johnson's former South Carolina teammate, one of her closest friends from their championship run together. Johnson did not just land on a team with a star player willing to invest in her development. She landed on a team that includes a person she already trusts completely in a building run by a franchise that selected her specifically because they believe in what she can become. That is not an accident. That is an organization that put thought into what kind of environment their players would thrive in and then built it. Now, let us actually talk about what this means on the court. Because beyond everything personal, beyond the full circle narrative and the friendship and the locker room chemistry, basketball is still what this is all about. And the early evidence from training camp and the preseason is something that everyone who follows the Fever should be paying very close attention to. In her WNBA preseason debut, Raven Johnson played 17 minutes off the bench against the New York Liberty, one of the best teams in the league. In those 17 minutes, she recorded 6 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds, 2 blocks, and 0 turnovers. 0 against the New York Liberty in her first taste of professional basketball. That is not a player who is going to need a long adjustment period to figure out what level she is operating at. That is a player who came in already wired for the pace and the demands of this game, who made decisions with a poise and efficiency that rookies almost never show in their first professional appearance. In a second preseason outing against the Dallas Wings, a game where Clark played 16 minutes and scored 21 points before stepping back, Johnson took over primary ball handling duties for the remainder of the contest. She responded with 3 points and 5 assists in 21 minutes. When a moment got bigger and the responsibility increased, she did not shrink. She did not disappear. She played like someone who has been preparing for exactly this her entire life, which of course she has. The environment she is operating in now accelerates everything. The Indiana Fever, under the standard that Caitlin Clark sets in that building every single day, is not a soft landing spot. Clark has spoken repeatedly about the championship mindset she brings to every practice session, about the habits and the preparation and the refusal to accept anything less than the best possible version of every single rep. Johnson has acknowledged this directly. She talks about Clark constantly referencing the small margins that separate teams who win championships from the ones who do not. The fraction of a second reads, the detail in late game execution, the accountability to the process even when no one is watching. That is the environment Raven Johnson gets to develop in every single day. And given what she has already demonstrated in the preseason, the ceiling for where she can go in this league, with Clark mentoring her, with Aaliyah Boston beside her, with Dawn Staley's championship pedigree woven in her foundation, is genuinely difficult to put a number on. There's a version of this story that media outlets were clearly hoping for. The version where the rivalry never truly dissolved. The version where every moment between Clark and Johnson during training camp gets analyzed for signs of lingering tension. The version where the wave-off hangs over everything like a shadow that never fully lifts. That version makes for easy content. It gives people something to debate. It fits neatly into a narrative box that the internet knows how to engage with. But that is not the true story. The true story is more interesting than that. It is more human than that. It is the story of two elite competitors who were placed on opposite sides of one of the most amplified moments in recent women's basketball history, who had every excuse to let that moment define how they see each other, and who instead chose to look at each other as people first, as teammates with a shared goal, as two young women who both want the same thing, a championship, and who recognize that the fastest route to that thing was through each other, not around each other. Johnson has said it plainly. She put the past in the past. And Clark, who is not exactly known for being sentimental about anything that does not directly contribute to winning, demonstrated through her actions, through the answer questions, through the mentorship, through the genuine warmth that Johnson has described, that when it comes to the people who are committed to the same goal, there is no room for old stories, and there is no use in holding on to them. The Fever opened their 2026 regular season on May 9th at home against the Dallas Wings. And the team that takes the floor that night will include Caitlin Clark, who has shown continued development as both a scorer and a defender heading into this season, alongside Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, and now Raven Johnson, a rookie who arrived with a chip on her shoulder the size of college basketball arena and the skill set to back it up entirely. Analysts and observers who have watched the Fever closely heading into this season have described this roster as a genuine championship contender. The core is established. The depth has been addressed. The chemistry between the players, from everything that has leaked out of training camp and the preseason, appears to be real and not performed. And sitting somewhere in the middle of all of it is Raven Johnson, the 23-year-old from Atlanta who almost never made it here, who came within a decision of walking away from the sport permanently, and who now gets to spend every single day in a building with people who are actively invested in how far she can go. It is worth pausing on that for a moment, because there are a lot of athletes in professional sports who arrive at the highest level with all of the talent in the world and never develop into what they could have been, because the environment was wrong, because the people around them were not invested, because the circumstances did not align in a way that allowed them to grow. Raven Johnson is not that athlete. The circumstances she has landed in are almost uniquely positioned to allow her to become the best version of herself as a professional basketball player. And the reason those circumstances exist, at least in significant part, is because of Caitlin Clark, the same person who was involved in the moment that nearly took everything from her. Let us close with what this story actually is, because it is not just a basketball story. It is bigger than the Fever. It is bigger than the 2026 WNBA season. It is bigger than any single moment in any arena. It is a story about what happens when a person who has been at the center of genuine cruelty, the kind of cruelty that the internet specializes in, the anonymous, targeted, relentless kind that finds its sharpest edge when it is directed at young women in public life, decides not to let that cruelty write the ending. When she decides that the people who try to push her out of the things she loves do not get to win. When she leans on her faith, on her teammates, on her coach, on the people who actually know her, and when she finds a way to convert pain into performance. It is also a story about what it looks like when a person at the absolute top of their sport uses that position to lift someone up instead of simply protecting what they have built. Caitlin Clark did not have to invest in Raven Johnson. She did not have to answer those questions. She did not have to show up in the locker room as the version of herself that Johnson described, the funny, goofy, genuinely present human being behind all the highlights. She could have kept a professional distance, and no one would have said a word about it. Instead, she chose to be the kind of teammate that changes the experience of the people around her. That is what a leader actually looks like. Not just the clutch performances, not just the record-breaking scoring nights, the daily, quiet, consistent decision to show up for the people who share your jersey. Raven Johnson came into the Indiana Fever with a story that would already have been worth telling. 2 national championships, the SEC Defensive Player of the Year, a 5-year career at South Carolina that ended on the highest possible note. A viral moment she turned into fuel for one of the best individual defensive performances in championship game history. That resume is extraordinary on its own, but what she arrived with is now being built on by an environment and buy a relationship that could take her somewhere genuinely special. In 3 years, after a 5-second moment in a college arena nearly ended everything. She is now in the best possible position she could have imagined to find out exactly how far she can go. Think about where this story was in 2023, and then think about where it is today. Now ask yourself, where does it go from here? If this video gave you something to think about, make sure you like it before you go. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign to join. More stories like this are coming, and you will not want to miss them when they drop.